All right, welcome back to the channel. Mikey Garcia, the biggest hypocrite in all of boxing, puts his foot way in the back of his throat, talking sideways about Gary Russell Jr. Let's talk about that in this video. Straight hypocrite. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. Mikey Garcia, wow, has the nerve to act like he don't know who Gary Russell Jr., how Gary Russell Jr. fights. The people in his car people around him act like they don't know who Gary Russell Jr. is. And when asked about the Gary Russell versus Devin Haney fight in the Gary Russell Jr. versus Gary Russell Jr. versus Devin Haney fight, or the Gary Russell Jr.'s desire to fight Crawford, it was like, I ain't got nothing to say about it. I ain't got nothing to say about it. I don't care. Like, like Mikey Garcia-ish. You can tell that it was bugging him. You can tell the fact that Gary Russell Jr. is the bigger news in boxing right now than Mikey Garcia irked Mikey Garcia. Like, I'm supposed to be asking questions about Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr., people on my level. What do I care about Gary Russell Jr.? But anyway, that was his old funky attitude, man. Pump Mikey. But anyway, Mikey had that attitude, but the lady that was interviewing him, I think it was a Fight Hype interview, kept pushing Danny Garcia, kept pushing Mikey, kept asking Mikey. Then Mikey went and became the biggest hypocrite of the day. Okay, I won't say in boxing because there's some monster hypocrites, but Mikey went 100% hypocrite. And let me explain to you what that is. Gary Russell, and I'm sure some of you guys already know, but let me walk you through it. Gary Russell Jr. is the WBC featherweight champion. Featherweight is the weight of 126 pounds. We should know for sure towards the end of this week, is supposed to be fighting Devin Haney for the WBC lightweight championship, right? And he wanted to fight Terrence Crawford for the 147-pound WBO belt. That is what Mikey Garcia is saying. He doesn't understand why Gary would want to do that. What is a hypocrite? Somebody that says one thing and does something else. So we just reviewed what Mikey Garcia said, right? He said, why would a guy at 126 want to go to 140 and then want to go to 147 and fight guys that are that much bigger? What's Gary Russell? Why would even Gary Russell want to do that? Said that, right? What Mikey did, though, was the exact same thing that he's wondering why Gary Russell Jr. wants to do it. And that's why I was so hard on people for acting like Gary Russell Jr. doesn't have a right, or it'd be ridiculous for trying to fight Terrence Crawford. That is a lack of respect for Gary Russell Jr. that is ridiculous. Because Mikey Garcia started his career at 126 pounds. I do believe his first belt that he held was the 126-pound WBO title. So Gary Russell Jr. is the WBC 126-pound champion. Mikey Garcia was the 126-pound WBO champion, which tells you they started at the exact same place in their career. Devin Haney is what? The WBC 135-pound champion, right? What was Mikey Garcia? He was the 135-pound WBC champion. So, a guy who fought at 126, the same weight class that Mikey Garcia fought at, is going to fight a guy at 140 for the same belt that Mikey Garcia fought for and won against a lot lower level of competition in Zataklanen, right? Much lower level I think that might even have been a vacant WBC belt Mikey got a shot at. But regardless, It's a W. He was legit W. He was definitely a legit lightweight champion. And, oops. He's also a legitimate 140-pound champion. So he went up a weight class, because I think I was saying 140 for Devin Haney. It's obviously lightweight 135, right? But Mikey went to 140 and fought Sergey Lipinets. Then he moved up. And fought and got the brakes beaten off of him by Errol Spence Jr. So why can see the hypocrite? Because there's some hateration in there too. Acting like you don't know who the dude is. Forget Gary Russell Jr. Who cares about Gary Russell Jr.? Oh, Gary Russell Jr. said he wanted to fight you. He said, why are you talking about Mikey? Mikey talking all that stuff. I'll fight Mikey too. Now you acting like you don't know him. You want to act like you don't know that he's doing trying to do the exact same thing that you were bragging about trying to do. You got the Errol Spence Jr. fight. Why shouldn't? And you are a 126-pound guy. Why can't he get a Terrence Crawford fight at 147 pounds? You were a 126-pound guy. Beat Orlando Salido. Why? And you went up and beat Zadok Clannon. Actually, and I'll give you Robert Easter. You beat Robert Easter for the IBF because that's a better win. Beat out Robert Easter for the IBF belt. Why can't Gary Russell Jr. move up and try to do the same thing that you do? See how funny it is when Canelo Alvarez wants to move up to 175 pounds on fights now that it's come out that the zone it didn't even want, right? The network doesn't want. People ain't asking for. But when he moves up to fight somebody, some washed up ex-alcoholic dude that got knocked out 2 times in the last 3 years, when Canelo goes to fight that, boxing media who are in bed with these dudes, he's a superhero, right? He's a superhero. He's doing what Henry Armstrong's trying to do. But Gary Russell Jr. tries to literally do what Henry Armstrong did, which was go from featherweight to welterweight, win the featherweight title and win the welterweight title, right? Win the lightweight title and the welterweight title all in the span of a year and a half. That's what Henry Armstrong did. He won the 126, he won 147, 126, 135, and 147. But you guys are acting like a guy that's literally trying to do what the great Henry Armstrong did, exactly what he did. You guys are okay with somebody doing some gross approximation of it that nobody asked for, where nobody even doubts that he would be able to do it. Very few people doubted that Kovalev was going to beat Rocky Fielding for his 168-pound belt. Ooh-wee. Or he was going to beat old grizzled, like I said, alcoholic Sergey Kovalev. Somebody really thought at any point in time that Canelo Alvarez was going to lose that fight. But you got a problem with Gary Russell Jr. trying to do it. Now, why is that, I wonder? Why is that? Some people might say because, Gary got a little too much of this in his skin, right? And I would say, I'm sure in the minds of many of the fight fans, that I had come at odds with, I'm sure, I don't doubt that has something to do with it. However, as far as the media goes, no. I don't believe that that's what that is. I believe with the media that Gary Russell Jr. Gary Russell Jr. is not promoted by somebody that got them in their pocket. So on YouTube, with channels that can talk about boxing and don't have that pressure on them, you see how much interest there is in Devin Haney and Gary Russell Jr. But if you're left to rely on Ring Magazine and ESPN to tell you what's popping, you never heard of them before. And I promise you, there's a lot of great fights and great fighters that are being covered up in the sport of boxing because of the media relationship that was so eloquently described by Chris Mannix, the functional relationship between Top Rank, Golden Boy, and the press. That's the why that their fighters resonate with the boxing fans. The flip side of it is that if you don't have a functional relationship with a guy like Chris Mannix or Steve Kim or Dougie Fisher or Dan Rayfield, that the fight fans, that you won't resonate with the fight fans. Nah, dude, don't nobody need Dan Rayfield, man. Don't nobody need, like some people say you don't need promoters. I'm not there with that. Okay. I'm not like, I do believe that there are young fighters that need promoters. You do need professionals working with you if you can trust them, because you can't do it all by yourself. But you do not need Dan Rayfield. You do not need Steve Kim. You do not need that type of media to sell you, dude, because that's not how people are taking information in now. They're taking it on their phone. You're talking to me. I promise you, more than likely, you're talking to me on a cell phone, on a smartphone, right? Or whatever you're on an Android, or you're on an Apple. You're not reading a newspaper. So you don't need them. Anyway, it is what it is. You let me know what you think in that comment section. And with that, I'm out.